In the first half of this demonstration, we did the head and just the portion of the background immediately around Lady Agnew's head. So let's go ahead now. We've got a lot of background still to do. I'm going to start in the darkest portion of the background, which is achieved by Sargent draping that enormous blue-green drape over probably over a prop studio screen and articulating the angle of the panels, creating this very dark area, which I'm doing with a combination of ivory black and Viridian for the most part, with a touch of cerulean blue added. Now, in the painting of the background, we have to remember Sargent's #1 rule in technique, and that was economy of means. The idea was to, wherever possible, have a single stroke do the work of many strokes. So to live up to that self-imposed standard, as you study his work, you're conscious of the fact that he always used the largest brush possible to do any given task. If he could use a number 16, he would use a number 16, and he very reluctantly would go down to the smaller brushes. So we will brush in this dark ivory black, Viridian, cerulean blue combination just as simply and boldly as we can. As we move toward the right, we're going to lighten it slightly and gray it down slightly by adding some of neutral 7 there. So it's that cuts the intensity of the Viridian. And you say, well, why are you making the strokes in such a variety of directions? I believe that's the way Sargent did, for simply interest later when you're viewing the painting. He certainly would not have wanted to have the strokes all in a single direction. He might have taken a big soft sable, and at certain points he might have gone over it and used the sable to soften the effect of the big bristle brush, and he also might have used his hand, which has a simplifying effect. But he starts with extreme dark here and begins going progressively lighter as he moves toward the light-struck right-hand side of the canvas, and at that point he shifts into a very much lighter color. Here I'm going to use more cerulean blue and considerably more white. And let's just try that color. We may have to alter it. Looks basically pretty good. I think maybe a touch of white added in that. Did the initial strokes go from left to right or up and down? I don't know. But one thing I'm sure is that there was a variety of brush strokes. And once the paint was dry, he may very well have gone back and added strokes in opposing directions. All right, let's go now to the painting of the chair, starting with the wooden architecture around the outside edge. We're going to try to remember as we go along that in each case, Sargent tries to greatly simplify it. He will take a complex thing, such as the ornamental carving on the back of that chair, and he will try to give us a really quite astonishingly simplified treatment of it. What I'm going to start with now is the shadow on that wooden carved portion of the chair. I'm using black, white, burnt umber for a warmish dark shadow. It's very dark, almost approaches black. Up here in where it curves over the upper part of the chair, it really appears black in the reproduction. And then where it starts up over the curve of the cushion, it becomes a grayish tone. Why, I can't say exactly. I suppose that it's getting reflected light from the side of her face and the dress, for one thing. So here we're using, once again, black and white and burnt umber. Just the simplest suggestion of that carving. Then in the center of the back of the chair, there's a little bit of ornamental carving, which he represents with the shadow tones first. There is virtually no attempt there in the painting itself to execute any kind of very specific detail. That's just not the kind of painting Sargent did. At least when it came to the props and the background elements. It is very simplified, always very direct. All right, I'm going to take my middle value neutral gray, put some yellow ochre in it, and we'll use this to paint the light-struck side of that carved ornament. I'm not going to make it any more complicated than Sargent did, and since I'm working in a shorter time frame than he did, I ought to really even simplify it. But it's hard to go more simplified than Sargent. It's really hard to do that because that was certainly one of the hallmarks of his painting style. All right, a little crisp, if we can, a little crisp highlight on that part of the ornamental carving. Soften the edge. Take a little ivory black and darken that for the lightest area there on the curving back of the chair. Interestingly, he picks up a little bit of blue, and you just never know. Did that pick up from the background, or why is that? There's a little bit of blue here in the wooden portion of the chair. Has a casual look, as if it just sort of happened, and a soft edge where that chair meets the background. And the rest of that ornamental carved part is a more conventional grayish color. And then the dimension of the cushion is shown by that grayish passage. So then coming down the light-struck side of the carved back of the chair, let's take a tone that even begins to approach almost an off-white right here. It's amazing how he goes from very dark to very light. And we'll make that stroke, again, the way we think Sargent would have, namely the long direction of the form, the long direction of the form. That was another cardinal principle of Sargent's. There are two ways to paint any form. In this case, it would be to paint that way, against the direction, and the other is to paint down with it. And in 99 cases out of 100, Sargent would go with the direction of the form. We'll see that when we get over into the painting of the fabrics. All right, let's get a large general tone on that cushion, because we want to get into the painting of the pattern on that cushion, which makes it so fascinating. But before we do that, we have to put a middle value tone of the background of that floral pattern. I've got black, white, yellow ochre, and now I'm adding a little bit of alizarin crimson. There's just a slight touch of a lavender quality to some of that background tone. Let's try this tone. All right, we'll go all the way up to the wood part of the chair. We'll soften that edge. All right, and then as we approach the the chair curves towards us, which means that that tone is going to deepen and become more intense. So I'm going to add more black and more alizarin crimson. And we go down the cushion like that, and then blending it gets lighter as it goes toward the sleeve of the dress. And then as we go down into the shadowy recesses of the chair, it gets very much darker. I'm going to use black, alizarin crimson, and neutral gray, and which gives us a nice deep shadow tone here, being cast by the arm of the chair down here at the bottom of the part of the cushion which we can see. All right, then in the light struck area of that cushion, let's take the same color, add some white. There's one passage that it almost has a suggestion of that it's a white fabric. Lighter than that, more white. And then we'll try to achieve the roundness of the cushion by modeling. A very soft edge there to give the feeling that the cushion comes out and then around and then back. If you ask Sargent what he was painting, he would probably not comment on the fact that it was a chair. What he was painting was the effect of the light. It was the effect of the light that fascinated him, and how the light fell on objects and on faces and on natural things and landscapes. It was the way the light fell that so captivated him and any impressionist painter. And then we have one last little section up there just beyond the curve of that cushion. All right, so we have tones about like that. But the thing that always catches the eye when you're looking at this painting is that wonderful floral pattern that Sargent has so effortlessly seemed to have painted on that canvas. And whether or not anybody else can do that remains to be seen. Where to begin? I'd say let's begin in those sort of crimson passages. I'm going to take alizarin crimson and neutral gray, because it's a very subtle set of colors. And I'm going to start, and the hard part of this for any artist studying Sargent is that pattern is a single stroke per blossom or leaf. For example, he goes here and here and here and here and here. He doesn't go back and fuss with it. It is just simply a single stroke. Then he comes on down and he goes one stroke here and one stroke there and another stroke there. Where he approaches the face, you can see that he has deliberately raised the value. It's lighter and it's a touch more reddish. And he has a very interesting pattern right here, right near her shoulder, where he goes here and here and here and here, and then he defines the shoulder with it, and here, and like that. And then you can see that the brush is beginning to pick up the background color, which automatically lightens it and gives him a little bit of a gradation. But let's go back toward the dark, where the color deepens and gets more intense, like right here, coming down and here, and then you can't see what that is. We assume those are beautiful flowers. It's mysterious as we look at it. Continuing with that same color, there is a passage here and here, a little bit more reddish and a softer color over in here. And the strokes go in different directions, and here's some of that. And like that. All right, let's clean the brush off. And let's try for some of the bluish passages. Ultramarine blue and white and grayed way down with a touch of neutral gray. And here's a big, darker than that. A little more blue, a little more black. Not too much darker, but here's a bluish passage. And there's a bluish passage in here. And then over here it gets darker and it's more emphatic. And there's here and here and here and here and here. All right, the bluish passage. Then going down into the shadow that the arm of the chair casts, we have to add black. And there's a passage down here which is darker. It's free. That's not, believe me, he's not fussing with it. He's just taking a shot at it from a distance. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to behold. Imagine how some other artist would have fussed meticulously over that pattern. Down here in the shadow, he reaches down with his bristle brush and he goes like this and this and this and this. And then the stem of something and a few black strokes. But Sargent's pattern is more interesting than mine is. Let me just sort of throw some random touches in there. Chromium oxide green here. Some small touches, and I can't begin to exactly replicate it. It's just too impressionistic. And then right here some touches, and then there's one there. And let's see, a couple more here, and a couple of touches there. You could really have fun doing this if you try this yourself. And the secret is just to let yourself go and try to imagine the sheer joy that Sargent had in not only the delight in the pattern, but the delight in his own dexterity. He obviously loved to paint passages like that. All right, let's go. I see that the curve of the sofa is considerably darker here. Let me see if I can push that down in value to get a little bit more of the feeling that curves around. All right, we want to tackle this upper portion of the dress, and it has a beautiful sort of translucent, slightly bluish cast. I'm going to use ivory black and ultramarine blue, and as always, I'm going to reduce the intensity of that with my neutral. Comes up looking very grayish, so I'm going to take just a touch of cerulean blue, which is a very intense color. Just a touch of it adds a great deal of tinting to my mixture. All right, somewhere in there, I'm looking for the color that will go in this portion, in that portion of the original. Let's try something about like that. Seems too blue. I wish I hadn't added that cerulean blue. Let me cut it back down with the neutral. And I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. Let me try that up here. Seems a little better. Let's go ahead with that. It is essentially the same blue that appears out there in the background, only slightly lighter. All right, we want to try to paint this part of the dress with the same abandon, if we can, that Sargent did. That's asking quite a bit, of course, but I'm going to use the largest brush I feel I can. This is a number 8 filbert. And we're certainly not going to be careful. We're going to try to splash the colors on. We do have the charcoal drawing underneath to guide us, so we can always wipe back down to that if we had to. Now right up here, where I approach the flesh area, I look to see how much darker than the flesh is it, and it's just it's a touch darker, but not too much. Where we come up here to where the tones of the dress meet the tones of the chair, Sargent is amazingly casual about it. Nowhere is he trying to, as a child would say, stay within the lines. That is not part of what he's trying to accomplish. What he is trying to do is to get the feeling of the flow of this fabric in different directions, and the texture of it. Now I'm mixing a slightly darker version of what I've been using because I want to do a little bit of drawing here. This is just a slightly darker version. Some of these folds are casting shadows on other parts of the dress, and it helps to give the dress dimension. So let me put in just a few of these darker accents right here, and radiating out from that ornament. And the brush strokes are done almost what would you say, almost at random. All right. It might be that before we go any further, that tremendous dark there ought to be stated. That's that dark tucked in the shadow of the bow is the thing that really anchors this section of the painting. And I'm mixing that with black and white and a deep touch of ultramarine blue. And I'm going to go in there and just really punch that dark behind where that bow will be painted. Next to her hair, it's one of the darkest areas in the painting. I'm adding a little bit of white so that it'll be, and I'm adding a little bit of white and a little bit of burnt umber. The burnt umber will gray it down. Now there's my extreme dark in the shadow of the bow. And the only other place where that same color occurs, there are two other places. One is right down here in the shadow of the other sleeve. There's a little touch of it. And then there's a tiny little accent right there. But let's lay that brush down and take a much larger brush. And now let's try to get the overall color of this bodice area. It goes, the color is really easier to get than the value because it covers quite a range of values. In this area, it has about that darkness. When I'm using the word value, I'm referring to how dark or how light a tone is. And you say, now why are you going in those different directions when the strokes are this way? I think the finishing strokes are the ones that are directional, and I'll try to illustrate what I mean in just a moment. Let me just get the tone on here. And then how about that beautiful passage where we see her arm through the translucent fabric? Well, we'll deal with that in a moment. Let's try to get this bodice tone on here. Right here is where it's lightest, and it gets almost as light as the flesh tone, and it even has a suggestion of flesh tone in it, although the dress itself is not translucent at that point. It's only translucent in the arms. But this interesting passage here is really lighter than the flesh tone is here. All right. Let's lay that brush down and take about a medium-sized brush. This is a number 6. And let's see what we need to do. How about where the sleeve meets the chair? Right there, it's lighter than the pattern. We'll do that fairly carefully. Down here, look, it's darker than the pattern. Suddenly a shift in value there. Some slightly darker passages along the edge there. Now here are some directional strokes. Here's one that goes like that. And then right along the neckline, there are some darks. All right, now coming over here, there's some wonderful directional, I'm calling them directional strokes. They're really folds in the fabric is what they are. But we're making the brush stroke in the direction of the fold in the fabric. All right, and then as we come up toward the shoulder, we need to use more color and slightly darker, and we have to fairly carefully draw some of these folds up here. There's one that sort of curves up like that and casts a shadow. And then that shadow tone we put in earlier, maybe it could be darker still, right there and there. Okay. Down here in the lower part of the sleeve, some darker passages, an interesting fold right there, another fold there. And if you ever get a chance to study the original, or if you have a beautiful book of reproductions and you can sit and study this actual painting, I think you'll be amazed, as I have, at how casually done those folds are. Now, let's do the part that the layman is so fascinated with, the appearance of those arms, the flesh color of the arms peeping through the translucent fabric. Let's put a little bit of actual flesh color on there and here. And then let's come back and sort of scumble over that. Now that's an artist's term, meaning to kind of drag paint over the surface. And here it's a combination of the two. Where the fabric is more opaque, the color of the fabric takes over. Where you're looking directly through the thin layer of the fabric, you see the flesh color more realistically. Over here along the edge of the chair, you're seeing a little bit of the chair through the fabric. Now, what about that? So I have to put a little touch of the lavender effect here, slightly lighter than the chair. There's where the translucent fabric lets the color of the chair show through. And then right on the edge, it's lighter because the fabric is more opaque there. And like so. Now there's some other little passages of interesting color. There's a little touch of lavender there for some reason, some mysterious reason. Now, let's pause for just a moment and take a small brush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cast shadow of the dress, the shadow that the dress casts on her rib cage. Now, this is an important stroke because it shows us now there's the shadow of the dress just above the clavicle, and then here it is right below the clavicle. And it gives us the feeling of the dress lying over the fabric, over the fabric lying over the flesh. And it also gives us the shape of the bone just beneath the surface. All right, let's go ahead with the painting of the fabric. And I'm going to do a few small folds like catching the light, like right there. And right there, and right there, and right there behind the locket. And like that. All right, right in the middle of that, of the bodice area is, Sargent has indicated a very elaborate little locket, And it's an amazing piece of painting, mostly because of how incredibly casually done it is. I'm going to take just a little bit of the paint off of the surface there. And it is certainly not painted in detail. First of all, he has a sort of a maroon lavender section, and that starts to go up like that. And then he has a very vivid sort of cerulean blue, as if they were turquoise gems of some kind, like so. And then he has some little sparkling, I'm just going to call them cerulean blue passages. I don't know exactly what kind of gem that is, but he indicates them with just little loose strokes like that, almost as if they were not attached to the locket. And there is some more of that down here below. Every portrait painter, professional portrait painter who looks at that painting must be envious of Sargent's ability to get away with such a casual painting. Your average working portraitist would spend a whole day on a subject like that, right in the middle of the locket, and you can only assume that it's a great diamond catching the light there. Sargent puts a big stroke of pure white. It's one of the few pure white strokes in the entire canvas, just like so. And then he takes a little pointed sable, and there are a few touches of gold, and I'm going to do that with cadmium yellow light. It's the first time I've used that color in this painting, and a little bit of white, and there's a horizontal gold accent right there. I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium orange to it. There is a vertical gold accent there. There's another vertical there. And there is a cluster of them right toward the top, right here, 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 and here. And believe it or not, that is all that he does with that. It's almost as if he was defying his client to critique it. It's so casual. But what about that beautiful, delicate necklace from which it is suspended? I'm going to take burnt umber, mix it in with my cadmium orange, and with a pointed brush, we'll just come around the neck like this. Needs to be darker than what I have on the brush. Here we come. Around the corner of the neck and down over the clavicle, and then like so. And then over here on the other side, the color comes down out of the shadow, up over the collarbone. You feel the fullness of the collarbone, and then down, and the color gets very much lighter, and it goes down to the locket. And that's all there is to that. It is so very, very casually done. Now, we're getting to the part of the painting that is in many ways the most beautiful and spectacular, and that is the painting of that beautiful sash. We are just looking at a reproduction of the painting here, and I remember when I saw the original at the Whitney Museum a few years back, I was so surprised at the paleness of it, the subtleness of it. I had seen it all my life in exaggerated reproductions. And some reproductions you see of this sash, that lavender color is very much distorted and exaggerated. In the original, it's quite subtle. I've used alizarin crimson, black, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. And what is interesting, to me the most interesting feature is the fact you can't tell really where the sash ends and the dress begins. The flow of one into the other is almost maddening when you're trying to analyze it. It's because of the casual, painterly style. Now over here, Sargent makes there's a big bow-like shape, and it's just amazing how casual it is. There's a bow here. But before we get lost in the multiple folds and so forth, let's do the shadow tone. Alizarin crimson and neutral gray. All right, whoops, and a little bit of blue. Let's try this. For the shadow tone, underneath needs a little more blue. Now, it's a puzzle as to why the shadows are blue on a lavender sash. I can't give you the answer, but that's the way they're painted. I can't tell you why it's that way. For example, this great big area of shadow that starts down the length of the sash, that is alizarin crimson, blue, ivory black. And then where it comes into the light, it gets very lavender in color. Absolutely a beautiful color, at least here in this particular reproduction. It's different in every time you see that painting reproduced in a book. But you can almost feel Sargent splashing the color on. There is no attempt whatsoever to be pedantic or meticulous. In fact, that's the furthest thought from his mind. What he wants is the thing to flow and to have a dash to it. Now let me just take a little of the paint off so that I can pick up my drawing underneath there. There is a bow of some kind in the sash, and Sargent paints it almost as if it was it almost has the look of a flower, which is interesting. And he paints it in kind of a two-dimensional way. There's a light tone and there are dark tones, and he doesn't, there's no blending of any kind there. There is a deep shadow tone right there. Now that's not on the sash, that's on the dress. So that has a bluish cast to it. Let me just take a moment and clean my brush, and let's try for the color right in the middle of the sash. It appears to have some of the same color as the dress does. Right now I'm using the lavender color, but I'm going to have to shift gears in just a moment. Here the lavender continues down this fold. But then you can see as it goes on down the painting, it becomes almost the blue of the dress. So it's puzzling. And he's taunting us latter-day copyists. He knew how difficult it would be to emulate it. Here, right in the middle, it's the blue of the dress. So let's just splash that color in there. We can even add a little bit more blue where we come over here. Now there's the apparently a fold in the dress, intermixed with the fold in the sash. I suppose if one sat and analyzed it, you could figure out where one ends and the other begins. The most intense color, at least in the reproduction, is right here. So I'm adding a little bit more alizarin crimson. And there's some of that right here. It has a soft edge. Let me just blend that. And let me wipe the brush off. And now here it seems to be just the blue of the dress. For example, on this fold right here of the sash. I could even add a little bit more blue to that. More like that. And then, just beyond there, incredibly, is almost a greenish passage right there. Now, where does he get that? So if you're going to paint from Sargent, you have to stay really alert, because it's not just the obvious by any means. Here's a little highlighted plane. And now in just a moment, I'm going to take a smaller brush and try to refine this before it gets too wildly loose. Let's put some color on these big passages down here. And a little bit more lavender here. All right, let me take a smaller brush and let's just try to do some drawing in here just to make it seem a little more real, such as there's a bit of a shadow tone there. There's a nice crisp linear touch right there. There's another one right there. It's a fold in the sash. A dark there. And so forth. But the sash is a beautiful thing, and it's splashy and dazzling to look at, and a little bit daunting to paint. All right, we need to do the hands now, which in any portrait are always complicated and difficult. In this particular portrait, the hands occupy a fairly minor role, but what little detail there is has got to be fairly precise. First thing we need to do is to mix a color for that arm, and as we're looking at the painting, we realize that it is darker overall, the arm is darker overall, really than almost any tone on the face. It's because we're in lower light down here. So I'm going to take white, yellow ochre, cadmium red light, but I'm dipping into the mixture that has chromium oxide and cadmium orange. And we'll just paint that flesh color poster style over the arm, and then what little we see of this arm, it's tucked in behind the knee there, and it just comes over to the edge of the flower that she is holding. And then we'll have to come back and articulate that a little bit. First of all, the bright light tones of the dress are casting a area of reflected light on the arm. And it's silvery and has some of the blue and lavender of the dress. And we see it right here along that plane. It's just a reflection. It's just the flesh of her arm reflecting the tones of the dress and of the sash. All right, then, right in the corner of the wrist, right in the angle of the wrist there is a warm little shadow tone, and that tone defines the edge of the forearm. It's just a little detail, it's not much to it. And then I'm going to take a real warm tone, touch of Venetian red, and we'll go up here and define the edge of the thumb, the far edge of the thumb, which we see up to the knuckle, and then the lower part of that thumb. That's really all it is. Then between the thumb and the index finger is a plane of Venetian red right there. We just see that little touch of her hand. And then there's a transition plane between the two that connects those two darks. Needs to be a touch darker than that. Just like that, a little transition tone between the thumb and the index finger. Now over on this side, there's very little going on except that it gets darker toward the bottom. It's just simply modeling the form around down into the shadow. And then there's a nice, crisp, fairly dark shadow that the sleeve is casting on the arm. And we'll come around with that and then soften that edge. All right, now that's really all there is to that arm. Remember Sargent's watchword, economy of means. If you can do it simply, why do it in a complicated way? Now, let me clean that brush. I'm rinsing it out in mineral spirits here. And she is holding what appears to be a magnolia blossom. And let's just see how quickly and simply we can indicate that magnolia blossom. We'll do it by stating the shadow side first. And then that part of the blossom is casting a shadow on the rest of the blossom. And then there's a petal here that has a shadow side, and it, by the way, the entire blossom is casting a strong, crisp shadow on the dress, and let me indicate that right now. It's like that, and then under that larger petal, it's like that. The shadow that the blossom casts on the dress. And let me take some almost pure black, a little touch of alizarin crimson in it for that shadow. Once again, I'm going to clean the brush, and then let's put the light tones on the blossom. It's not quite white, but borders on it. I'm going to put a touch of cadmium yellow, and that's really too white. Let me darken that down. There's one petal of the blossom there, and I'm positive that Sargent tried to paint each petal of the flower with a single stroke if he could. That's just the way he delighted to do it. The reason I know that, in the painting the Wyndham sisters, there are magnolia blossoms in the foreground, and yes, each petal is painted generally with a single curving stroke. And then finally, the lightest blossom. I'm trying to find some clean white color on my palette without any success, and I'm going to have to quickly squeeze a little bit out because that is clean color and I have to have it clean. So there we go. And then right in the middle of that top blossom, it's almost white, and there's a little touch of white in this one. And then there's a touch of bright color right in the center of the blossom. It's yellow ochre, right there, just a little detail. Okay, that's all we're going to do there. Let's move over to the other arm. I'm going to pull my palette over here. And this is more complicated. The first thing we need to do is to establish that tremendous shadow being cast by the chair on the arm. I'm going to use burnt umber and a little touch of black. Sargent was not afraid to push a shadow to its limit, and I see pure, almost pure, yeah, I do see pure black in the deepest part of that shadow. Now right there, where I'm putting the stroke right now, that's the background behind her wrist. That's not the chair. But this part is a shadow on her arm, so it cannot be that dark. I'm going to put a little bit of a touch of white and a touch of burnt sienna into that shadow. All right, then where that shadow becomes a halftone, right here on the forearm, and goes on over and becomes the halftone on the side of the arm that defines the arm, and we run all the way down her forearm with it. And we'll draw the shape of the forearm. And we'll reach for a clean paper towel to wipe our brush off. And we have two areas of flesh tone, one above and one below. They're slightly different. The one above has a little bit more color. It is a very pale color, similar to the color up on the rib cage. So let's try something sort of like that. It's a very, very delicate color, puzzlingly less intense than the color over here. Not sure why. We'll spread it that way and this way and around here. We'll blend the light tone with the halftone. And now, where we emerge beneath the shadow, we need, first of all, a grayish halftone. Remember, this is being painted in the light of Sargent, the north light of Sargent's London studio, which means that the light was fairly cold coming in the window, and those transition halftones are very cool. Then where we come out into the light on the wrist, it's a similar tone to the color up here. We'll go right down the wrist with that. Doing a little bit of blending as we put it on. There's a highlight on that wrist, but let's paint the hand first, and then we'll come back to that highlight on the wrist. The little bit of hand that we see, just the thumb really and the index finger, nevertheless involves some fairly complicated draftsmanship. First of all, a dark shadow on the shadow side of the thumb, a crisp dark between the, her hand is on some of the architecture of the chair. That's what that is. And we'll indicate that with a dark. The sash is casting a shadow on the chair. Let me indicate that. All right, and then a shadow tone comes along the back of the hand here. Comes in and articulates the knuckle, and then we start down the index finger. Let's correct the drawing here by using some of the shadow on our background drape. We still have that over here on the palette. And that arm, which is just sort of a simple curve, not very anatomical looking. It just runs up and down there. And let me blend that tone. All right. Doing that, I cut in a little too deeply on the wrist. Let me just push that back out. I'll take the wrist color and just increase the fullness of the wrist just a little bit. I allowed the background to come in too far, making the wrist too thin. That's a little bit better, but I think it needs to be still more. Which reminds us, Sargent would tell us that every stroke must be a drawing stroke. I can just hear him saying it. Every stroke in the painting, every stroke is a drawing stroke. You're not just putting color on for the sake of color. It's a drawing stroke. And particularly in things which are hard to draw, such as hands. All right, we'll bring that color on down the index finger. There's we reach the knuckle, and then we see just a portion of the upper part of the finger, and then let's put just a tone on the detail of the chair that appears between the thumb and the finger. All right, that's a little architectural detail of the chair, which continues down here beneath the dress. Let me just see if I can indicate that. There's a tone of the chair coming out beneath where we're working, and we'll have to treat with that in a moment. Now let's go back to the hand. We need to define where the hand comes against the chair, and so we need the dark on the chair to do that. And there it is coming up the chair. Once again, the architecture of the chair. Now, we've got to put a halftone on the thumb below the knuckle to show that the thumb bends there and starts down into the shadow. And there is a transition halftone plane on the back of the hand, which is grayish, and let me see if I can indicate that. Goes over the fullness of the back of the thumb. And the idea is the wrist comes down and then the form comes out and forms the thumb. And that is basically it. We see a little highlight on the next knuckle, just a little touch on the next knuckle. And maybe for the finishing touch here, there is a little bit of a very indefinite bracelet around that wrist. And let's take burr number and come right across the wrist with it. Merge it into the shadow. Clean the brush off and get some yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, and we'll use that to paint the central part of that very indefinitely defined bracelet. And we'll lay that brush down and take white and pure cadmium yellow. Remember, that's the highlight for gold, and we used it up on the locket, and now we're going to use it here for the highlight of what appears to be some kind of a little ornament dangling from that locket. And we've got to do, I see, a little bit of drawing. First of all, the wrist, the upper part of the thumb is a little plump. Let's trim that down. Let's bring the tone of the chair down into the area of the hand. The hand is just a little plump is all. Let me see if I can just define it. We'll take the dark of the chair and just indicate the drawing. And then finally, I mentioned that highlight on the wrist, and that will be white and yellow ochre and cadmium red light, but very little red, mostly white and yellow ochre, and not that strong. Let me tone that down. About like so, a highlight on the wrist. And that is pretty much a statement of that hand. All right, we've got the big expanse of the skirt to do, and that is so much paint that I think we had better begin by mixing up some paint just for the purpose. I'm going to take some black and white just to get a grayish tone going. Well, this will be the large dark area here on the shadow side of the leg, and I'm going to take a touch of cerulean blue and a touch of viridian and add into that more viridian, and still more. All right, that will be, we'll test this against our reproduction. Looks pretty good. And now let's take white and just a touch of this for our big area of lighter tone. And then we'll mix the other passages with the brush as we go along. We'll throw in just a touch of flesh color, just to make that color push toward the yellow. All right, there's our two basic tones that we're going to use. And let's use the biggest brush that we dare. Here's a number 12 bristle filbert and a number 10. All right, let's start on the shadow side of the leg, and let's see how the color that we mixed, how that will work there. It's basically pretty good. It could be a touch darker, so we'll add a little bit of black to it, just a touch of black. Now these are big areas. We're doing a life-size painting, and well, that's basically, seems to be basically pretty good. Let's try it. And then we'll put other tones into it as we go along. Now we want to see the shape. It's her leg surprisingly revealed there beneath the fabric of the dress. Interesting when you think that this is 1892. A very casual pose there. And we can even see the drawing of the leg beneath the folds of the skirt. You can see that Sargent was interested in getting the anatomical feel of the shape of that leg. It's not just folds. There's an actual leg beneath the skirt. Let's indicate the crisp little shadow tones that lie along the edge of the sash. There's one there. There's one there. There's one there. Those should probably be a little darker than that. Let me take some black and some Veridian. Here we go. And we'll come down here, and that darkest dark will indicate like that. Now, we're messing up the edge of our sash, and of course we'll have to restore that after we get the dress painted. The sash really goes over the dress, so we won't worry about the fact that we're spoiling our edge there. All right, so there's our darkest accents. Let's go back to our general tone. Right where we feel the curve of the thigh here, there's a point at which the tone gets darker than it does below that point. In fact, it blends off. It's darker toward the top there. And then as it gets down here to the underside of the thigh, it gets darker again. And that's where the artist achieves the modeling. You get the feeling of the form of the leg beneath the dress. Now, interestingly, he has some warm color in there. I can't explain that. I don't know where it's reflected light. I don't know where it's coming from. Something out in the room, in the studio, is casting warm light, reflected light into the gray of that shadow. Or it might be artistic license, really. We assume that Sargent was just kind of recording everything he saw like a camera, but of course that's not true. That's not true. He had the license to make it whatever color he wanted to. So this may be flights of invention. In any case, it's interesting, that warm color in the shadow there. But let's go on with the shadow. Going down, as we go lower, it gets darker, curves around a shape like that, and like so. And then this tone is quite dark as we go down toward the bottom edge of the canvas. We're not going to try to do that in any kind of real careful or precise way. But right there we do want to be precise, where that fold takes place. All right, then that fold. This is the cool color again of the dress itself, and that comes down and forms a big, almost like an abstract shape there. It's a fold. It's a fold that has a shadow side. But this is not one of those academic studies of drapery, such as the ones that Leonardo da Vinci did. This is an impressionist's observation of those folds. Now, just beyond the knee, that bluish tone starts down the front of the leg like that. And over here, it's basically bluish with some kind of pinkish passages. And let's try for that. A little bit of a lavender pinkish cast. And that dress comes over the chair. And right up into that fold. And then, as we come up to the top of the leg, where the light from the studio, from the heights of the studio above, are falling on the model, there's a beautiful, cool upper plane here. And let me see if I can show that. We draw it right over the edge of the arm. And that's pretty good, except that it has to get darker as it goes over this way. And let me see if I can do that. Remember that the light is coming from the left. And as the form moves back over this way, it has to get darker, just has to. All right. Come forward with that and start down the knee. And then let's restate that dark that defined the shape of the leg here. Let me restate that. There it is right there. And let's just do a little bit of blending here. Now, I regret to say that I pushed the drawing of the top of the leg too far up. So let me take the flesh color of the arm and push it back down. There, that's better. All right. Okay, now we'll take our largest brush, the number 12, and our light batch of color, and let's put that color in. There's a million mysterious tones going on there, but it'll be easier to put those in once we get some wet paint on the canvas. Let's just get some wet paint going here, and then we'll introduce other tones into this big acre of skirt here. Just so much space and so much paint. All right, where we come down, it has to get darker, so let's start going darker here. Put some color on that fold right there. It comes down like that. And then some of these interesting darks here that give us the feeling of the way the fabric is hanging from the knee. The knee is the point of suspension there. And let's just bring this tone all the way over to the corner. All right. And that warm tone seems to start working its way up the front of the dress. And then we could maybe take a paper towel and just sort of smooth this down just a little bit. Just so we don't feel the presence of the brush stroke quite so much. Now, the bluish tone coming over the knee. A little touch of more blue. Still more. Still more. That's better. Keeping that tone lighter, let me just lighten that up just a touch. That has to contrast with the passage in front of it. Well, then it comes down, whoops, I managed to pick up more blue than I intended there. Let me take that out. And replace it with what should be there. All right, as we come down toward the front of the canvas, the sort of warmish, slightly yellowish, even has a suggestion of flesh color in it, begins to pick up, and let me see if I can indicate that. It tends to make the color of the dress sort of glow in the front. And once again, is it realism or is it artistic license? I'm not sure. In any case, it's not only fun to look at, but fun to paint. Now, some important highlights on the skirt. Using our big number 12 brush, there's a highlight right about there. And it comes down the skirt here. There's another highlight right about there. Now, not really as strong as what I'm doing. That's a little bit of an I'm sorry to say that's an exaggeration. I got to do that over. Let's take that out. It's really better the minute I wipe it. It's more realistic. Maybe we'll just leave that. We could restate that one a little bit. There's a big, bold set of highlights right there. And there's another one here. But it's not quite that simple. It's shaped differently. And this one is not quite as raw as that. And it starts up the legs sort of like that. And then there's an interesting little set of highlights right here, and here, and here, and here, and one more down there. And then there's a light tone coming up out of here. But let's see if we can find the brush that we painted the lavender sash with. And we'll just reconstruct the color of that sash quickly and come down here and clean up that edge. All right, we've moved back up into the upper portion of the canvas, and there are a million things that maybe we ought to be doing, but to finish up. But let's just do some of the more notable things. Looking at the chair, for example, we had a lot of fun with that pattern, but viewing the reproduction, there are three very unusual and striking highlights. I'm not sure what they are. They may be a fullness in the upholstery. They might be a crease in the fabric. I'm not sure. But in any case, they're there, and Sargent didn't do them for no reason at all. And they're just vertical strokes. One appears right here, just to the right of center, like so. Another one appears right next to her face, and it's lighter than the fabric background. And then another one, slightly darker, appears over here right in the middle of the floral pattern. Not sure what they mean. And then here's a fourth one, and I can't imagine what's causing it, but there's a long vertical light stroke going down here through the background, which adds a little bit of interest to the background. And let me take a soft sable brush and just slightly feather the edge of that highlight so that it's not too prominent. All right. Looking at the painting of the bodice, which is of the dress, which is so important, I sort of feel like we should put a few defining strokes. There's one that comes like this. There's one that comes slightly darker than that, right there. And like that. We can take a slightly lighter color and come over here and define the bottom of that fold just a little bit. But we don't want to sharpen it up too much, because part of the appeal of Lady Agnew is the floating kind of sensuous, amorphous quality of the one color blending effortlessly into another. One omission is we need a little bit of lavender in that bow in the, or whatever it is, in the, over here. Let's just add a touch of, needs to be a touch more blue than that. Here we go. This appears to be some sort of gathering of the fabric into a bow. And Sargent obviously enjoyed painting that. He just splashed the color in the way he did everything else in the canvas. And that adds a little bit of interest. We can, while we have that lavender color on the brush, we can go right up here under the locket and add a few impasto touches of color. But since we're working with Sargent as our model, we know that it would be foolish to try to tighten it up. And so it may be that we've learned as many lessons today as we can learn from Sargent.